Earlier this week, I had somebody ask me, how do you not care what people think or say about you? And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I think it's an important topic, it's a valuable topic. It is probably, if I had to guess, it is probably the biggest reason that most people never take big risks, never live big lives, never do big things, never have the lives that they want. I would I would venture a guess that fear of other people's words and opinions are likely the number one reason. And I mean, one big reason that I say that is simply because I know that struggle. I've been there before. Where I am today isn't where I have always been. And to be quite honest with you, in some ways, it is still a work in progress. This is not something that just comes naturally to people. Maybe there are some people out there like that. I am not one of them. I don't know many people like that, if any. I thought it would be valuable for me to share with you at least where I came from, because I've not always been here. And I'm assuming anyone that would be asking that question would be struggling with it. Since I know that struggle, and since I have a story to share, that's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you some ways today. I'm not only going to share my story, but I'm going to tell you how to get past worrying about what other people think, what other people say, to do what you are called to do, and to operate in confidence, just doing things the way you know you should, and not holding back anymore. And it wasn't easy, like I mentioned. This didn't just happen. Where I am right now and my ability to communicate and, holding events and going all over the country and, putting on and speaking publicly and getting on podcasts and just putting myself out there, this took a lot of intention. And I think that's the first thing that I want to say is it is an intentional process to get past what people think and what people say. It is ultimately a choice that you have to make. And for some of us more than others, a lot of it comes from the way you were raised, right? My parents raised me to be bold and to speak the truth and to take risks and do big things and take on big responsibilities, right? And so that was in me. That was instilled in me. I was trained that way. That was my normal growing up. But it's a lot easier to encourage your kids to do it than it is for them to learn how to do it and get used to doing it on their own and for themselves. And while my parents did teach me to do that, it was a lot harder to put into practice than it was at home, And I think with anyone also, it's really good to just think about this. We all have different levels of being able to live free depending on the environment we are in. And that has to do with being comfortable. If you're comfortable in an environment, it's because you know your place in that environment. You know where you belong. You know where you fit in maybe the hierarchy of things. You know what behavior is allowed or tolerated in that scenario, right? And so part of this depends a lot upon environment. And most of us are different people in different places. But I think that is a symptom of a deeper issue where all of this caring about what others think and what others say really comes from. And look, everybody's story isn't the same, but as far as my story goes, and I've shared this before on this channel, you can go back and watch the very first episode that I did. I believe I shared a lot about my own personal story there, but just a snippet of my personal story here that I didn't share there. This is actually my first time talking about some of this ever online and just putting it out there publicly. But I mean, I was a pastor's kid, and that is something that only pastors' kids will ever understand fully, right? It is an unbelievable experience that has some good about it, but there's also a lot of things involved that come with it that aren't nearly as shiny and enjoyable as a lot of people on the outside might think. As a matter of fact, I intend to put together a coaching program to specifically help pastors' kids to get through a lot of the stuff that I know they've had to deal with throughout their lives, because I had to deal with a lot of the same. And even today, I am still working on healing parts of me that were very broken, and still healing wounds that were very deep and that went very deep in my life as a part of being a pastor's kid and what I was exposed to and things that happened to me, just being in that position. But, being a pastor's kid, your life is a fishbowl. Everyone's watching you. You've got to, at some level, right? I mean, your family, your dad's a pastor. He depends at some level on, donations from people. That's essentially what churches work on, church entities, church structures. It's tithes and it's offerings. Some people give a percentage of their income. That would be tithes for those of you that aren't familiar. And then anything considered an offering would be like above and beyond your tithes. So these are all donations. The church doesn't charge for services. And so at some level, you've got to find ways to keep peace. And also, I think, too, it's not just about income. It's my parents were the type that really genuinely cared about people and a sense of family and having deep, genuine relationship with people. And so my parents were the type of people who, when you met them and you engaged with them, they brought you into a sense of family. And they loved people deeply and served them very deeply. But, with being a pastor, sometimes you have to say hard things to people. And there were times when that happened and relationships were broken, and then people, leave. And so there's always this balance of loving people and trying to bring them through while also holding them accountable without driving them away. And it's a very hard balance. And there is some trying to keep the peace and keep people happy behavior that I learned growing up, trying to just make sure I was representing myself well and make sure you don't rock the boat too hard, because you want people to feel like they're in relationship with you and you care about them. You want the best for them. You don't want to drive them away, right? And so that was my norm growing up. There are some things within the Western model of church, Westernized church, that lends itself to what you do and how you behave, and being very cautious as well, because people will use your behavior against you later on, and if you aren't careful. And so I kind of lived a life growing up that was, dressed nice enough to where people wouldn't be like, oh, the pastor's kid is dressed like a hoodlum, and stuff like that. But being a pastor's kid, that's the way it was, and I was always being watched. I felt like eyes were always on me. And so I felt at some level there was some, performative behavior, trying to make sure I put on a good face and represent my parents well. And in addition to that, it is, people look to your parents. They look to my parents being pastors. They look to them, and then they look at their kids and they go, are these the type of people I want to live like, right? And so they're looking at you to know, how do you represent the parents? I think that's every set of kids, they represent their parents at some level. And so I wanted to represent my parents well. But even more so than that, that whole life in a fishbowl is people also watched me very closely and made sure to give their opinion and tell my parents when I was misbehaving. And they also used my behavior against my parents when they were upset with my parents. And so, that was something that I had to grow up with. That's a burden that I had to bear at some level. And then I moved a lot growing up. I was born in Nebraska. After that, I lived in Missouri. After that, it was Australia, then Houston, Texas, then Southern California, and then finally Washington State for 20 years before I finally moved to Texas. And I think moving a lot, my parents and we moved houses in between. My dad leading different churches and being a part of different church movements all over the country and obviously all over the world. And we also traveled a lot. My parents traveled full time in ministry for a period of time. And so my brothers and I went with them on a lot of their trips. But there was also a bit of, for me anyway, you're always the new kid. You're trying to always see where you fit. You're trying to evaluate the situation and go, where do I fit here? You're trying to understand other people who have had relationships many times, especially in the church and in schools that you show up to. They've had relationships with other people for years, so you're a bit of the outsider. And so you're trying to see where you fit, and you really don't know where you fit. And so, raised to be bold and speak the truth and be who you are, and yet you've got to, at some level, put on a good face and a good outward appearance for other people because you represent your parents. And then on top of it, moving a lot, man, you're constantly feeling like you've got to fit in. And when you're in that place of feeling like you need to fit in, it says a lot about not knowing who you are, right? Because when you walk in certain rooms and you're comfortable there, in other words, you know who you are in that room. You know where you fit. But when you don't know who you are, you're a little more reserved, usually a little more quiet, because you don't know what you are allowed to do as the newcomer. And I think in those situations too, the real you ends up shining through one way or another. I know no matter what situation I was in, my giftings showed through. The DNA of who I was still showed through. How I cared about people showed through. And I mean, that's true with all of us. I mean, eventually, it doesn't matter where you're at, even if you're putting on a face somewhere and feel like you have to be a bit of a chameleon, the true you ends up showing through. And when I was 20 years old, there was a split in the church my parents led and that I was on staff at the time. And, this happens. If you've been in the church, you've seen a church split, or you've seen, people leave churches every day. They're upset at someone. They're upset at the pastor. They don't like the music. People leave for millions of reasons. Majority of them are usually stupid, in my opinion. And some of them valid for sure. But bottom line is people leave churches all the time. But when you got a church split, what usually happens is someone with influence within the church community splits off from the church, takes their own group of people because there was a conflict internally, and they go and start their own church, right? And then they start meeting in a building and they do their own thing. The church that I was a part of felt as close to family without blood as anything I've ever known. Now, there's good and bad parts of that. The bad part is that everybody's in each other's lives. You all know what's going on. People are dating. Everybody knows who's in a relationship. And also, we had a culture of pointing out in each other's lives where we weren't being Christ-like. There was accountability. We had we were encouraged to do that with one another. Some people don't like that. And when that happens, for some people, they don't react well. The bottom line is that there was a significant split in the church that my parents led. And all the details don't matter. But when that happened, I was no longer just an innocent bystander to people. I became the enemy because I was associated with my dad and, the church leadership, who people were really mad at. And in some cases, people, I'm sure, were angry with me personally as well. But people started to try and use me against my parents, accused my parents and the church leadership of some really heinous stuff that's completely untrue and has never been proven. And no one has ever even taken the time to really ask any questions about. And, through some accusations at me, through some accusations at my parents, and I lived in a shell of fear for the next probably 15 or 20 years. And I really feel like I got free probably 5 years ago. So it's 15 years of my life. And even today, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, I still have to work through some forgiveness and some pain that I still have to deal with because of this. People accused my parents of things that were completely untrue. They accused me of things that were untrue. Poisoned my name to my own clients. Poisoned my friends and told them things about me that were not true. Trashed me behind my back. People I didn't even know were connected. I remember I was coaching basketball at the local high school the year it happened, and one of the kids on the team I was coaching came up to me and told me that one of these people had gone up to him and said some things about me. At that point, I realized you really have to just learn to ignore it. Around every corner, it just felt like no matter where I went, things were being said about me by people that I had genuinely cared about. And they were lying about me. And I was losing friends because of it. And I was losing opportunities because of it. My mom used to write for one of the, no, it is the biggest home education publication in the world. And she was a regular column writer for them. And I remember one night, I found my mom weeping because multiple women from a church split who were friends and who had helped drive this church split and this rift between all these relationships, they were at the core of it, decided to get together and co-write letters to the editor of this magazine that my mom wrote for. And I got a copy of the letters. The lies that they told were unbelievable and heinous, and my mom got cut off from that job overnight. She had events taken away from her that she was supposed to be speaking at. And these people weren't trying to do anything, noble. They were just trying to harm my parents. And to me, this is related. It may sound unrelated, but to me, it created this environment and this almost cocoon that I wanted to stay inside of and hide from everyone inside of. Because if I ever stepped out, someone was going to accuse me of something. Someone was going to say something that was untrue. I would lose opportunities and relationships because of what other people had to say. And I didn't know how to escape from it. It controlled a lot of my behavior for the next 15 years. Now, at first, I hid. That was my initial reaction, to hide. Like a coward, hide. And don't open your mouth. Don't say anything. Don't be bold. I became very reserved in a lot of ways where I had been confident before. And then I didn't know how to cope with it because really I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what my identity was anymore. The church had been growing. I was on staff. I had just gotten married. We had a huge wedding. And all of this stuff happened. There was some other just traumatic stuff that went on in my life at that same time. So I went back into the construction business. And so I felt like, what do people think about me? What do they think happened? What do they think I did? What do they think about my behavior now? And the reason I cared is because I genuinely loved these people. I cared about their opinion. I cared what they thought. I had them in my home. I was in their home. We had relationship. We had history. And you typically care about the people around you and how they view you. That was me as well. But because I didn't know how to cope with it, and I really didn't know who I was anymore, I didn't know what my role was. I didn't know where I fit in the world. All my friends were gone. I was trashed in my own community to the point where strangers were coming up to me and saying things that they had heard, or people I wasn't familiar with at least. And so I went the complete other direction. I started to intentionally do things and live in a way that would bother them. I didn't realize until later that they were still controlling my behavior at that point. I think that's where a lot of us will go. We'll just go, oh, F them, right? I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my own thing. And then you find yourself intentionally doing things to antagonize them or get their hornet's nest stirred up or, just poke at them because you can, even if it's indirect. And you just watch the hornet's nest buzz, right? And I remember doing that. I was a music video writer. I used to write music videos and put things in those stories and poke the nest with that all the time because I knew those people were watching my life. And I knew it would piss them off. I knew it would upset them. And it worked. And they got real angry a lot of times. And that's just the way I operated for a really long time. I went into anger because I was in pain. And so first I hid, and then I came out and went the opposite direction. And then all of a sudden, it's like I got smacked with the truth that I was still allowing their criticism, their opinions, what they had to say about me, still control my behaviors and rule my life. And it almost ruined me. It was painful for sure, but I allowed that pain to hold on to me for 15 years of my life. It ended up controlling who I was. And then after I'd gone to the other end of the spectrum and acted completely outlandish and crazy to try and anger these people and just stick it to them, that became my normal. And so I started becoming that person, and it became real in my life. And I began to lose myself entirely. I began to live in the wrong way that these people had accused me of before. I began to let my standards slide. I began to violate my own moral code. I began to live in a way that I would be ashamed of now. And I got ashamed. And then that turned into being ashamed of who I was. And now I've got to be quiet. Now I can't say anything. And now I can't come out of my cage. And now I can't share and be free because I've allowed this to drive me so long that I've become the thing I didn't want to become. And that's where I was living. And ultimately, the point at which it changed was when my identity changed. Our identity is how we see ourselves. That's what I mean by identity. All of our behaviors come from our identity. We behave and act based on what we believe about ourselves, who we believe ourselves to be, and what we believe ourselves to be capable of. That is what identity is. I didn't know who I was. When all of this happened, I didn't have an anchor to hold on to. I had been finding my value and my purpose and my vision in the opinions and good graces and perspective of everyone else. And so when those people didn't want me anymore or wanted to harm me or didn't care about me anymore, I didn't know who I was. I had become dependent on other people to tell me who I was. So I decided to try to be something different, but it was a fake identity. It wasn't in line with what I actually believed about myself. And when I finally got to the end of it, I believed things about myself I didn't want to believe. And they were true. So there had to be a shift in me. And once I finally got clear on who I was, everything changed. Now for me, that was when I found out and really decided to surrender myself to. It was when I found out who I was because of who I belonged to. It was my salvation. It was finding God. It was me surrendering myself to God. And that's when my identity changed and I began to live differently. And so I'm just going to give you guys some things that I have done up until now. Just some things that I would write down. If you're writing this down, take down some notes. Write these things down. They will help you. They will help you conquer that fear of what other people think and what other people say. But once my identity changed, everything changed because now I was behaving from a different perspective. And don't get me wrong, man, this is still a process. Don't think that every time I turn this camera on, that I don't think, okay, I got to do this. Take a deep breath. Let's go. It's awkward at first. Same thing with talking to your phone, creating content, doing a public speaking gig, anything. It takes work. So first of all, that's the thing that I would say is number one. I mean, how you get used to this stuff is number one, you build the muscle. Some of this stuff can't be done without just enduring it. You get stronger by lifting more weight and lifting weight consistently. Sure, you got to fuel yourself too, but the point is you must move heavy things consistently. For your immune system to get built up, you've got to get sick. Your body has to learn to fight off disease. It needs to be tested in order to do that. There's nothing you do regularly that you won't get used to or develop an immunity to. I am where I am in many ways because I've taken a whole lot of criticism. You're going to take a whole lot of criticism if you want to be able to live in a way where you don't care what other people think. You're going to have to endure it. You're going to have to build that muscle. You're going to have to hear the hard things. If I had not been through the hard things I went through, I would not be who I am today. So you can't avoid it. But let's start at the top here. Just some points in building that muscle. Number one, know whose opinion matters. When the shift happened for me, it was when I realized how much value I was putting on other people's words and opinions, as opposed to worrying about who I had to answer to on Judgment Day at the end of my life. When you get to that place, it doesn't matter what anyone else's opinion is. Now, I'm not saying don't take wisdom from people that have good fruit in their lives and have wisdom to give and who you value because of the life they have and the character they live in. All right? Don't reject wisdom, but know whose opinion really matters. I care about my brother's opinion to an extent. I care about my dad's opinion to an extent. But I say to an extent because ultimately I care about God's perspective most. And if I hear him say something, even if my dad disagrees, even if my brother disagrees, even if my wife disagrees, I have to obey the voice of God. Number 2, know who you belong to. I behave in a fearless way today like I never have before, or a much more fearless way. I'm still always working toward more and more fearlessness. I behave in a much more fearless way because I know who I belong to. I know that I have the King's seal on me. I know that I walk in his authority, and he has given me the authority over the assignment I was put here on earth to live out and live over. When I know whose I am, I know who I am. One of my favorite mentors on the planet says, you know who you are by knowing whose you are. And that's the next point, is know who you are. Know who God made you to be. Get clear on your purpose. Get clear on your vision. Get clear on hearing God's voice so you know what those things are and you know you're walking in his will. So know whose opinion matters, know who you belong to, and know who you are. I know who I am. I know the mission in front of me. I know the assignment that God has given me. And I've chosen to live as that man long enough to where I've become him, and now it is normal and I see myself that way because I've reinforced it day after day after day after day. Know your calling and live in it so you can live it in confidence knowing you are not a hypocrite. All right, that's know who you are. Next point, know who is talking. All right, this is a good one. Look at who is criticizing you. The church split I mentioned 20 years ago, the people at the core of this thing, 4 women. One of them has been divorced multiple times, and her daughter is a drug addict on the street. I'm not saying it's all her fault, but there's a pattern here. Her own husband divorced her for doing this to me and my family. And I don't know how many divorces in she is. Woman 2 has been divorced at least 3 times and is now on her 4th marriage. She has a child who is drug addicted, and she has a child in a gang. I don't even know if she talks to her children. Woman 3 just left her husband of 35 years for her high school boyfriend who she's been sleeping with for years. Woman number 4 is on her 2nd marriage, has been pregnant out of wedlock 2 or 3 times now, and one of her children is a drug addict on the street or in prison. Now, I'm not saying people don't make mistakes, but what I am saying is pay attention to who is accusing you and ridiculing you and hurling judgment at you. Look at the fruit of people's lives before you listen to them. Some people will say, don't listen to people if you don't want the life they have. And that is brilliant. That is genius. Look at people's lives. Do you want the life they have? Then do what they do. If you don't, then they ain't worth listening to. So know the fruit. Next point, see above. Have a big vision. Have something that you have to pursue that is so big and so huge that there is no time for distraction. One of the biggest reasons I went through so much pain and turmoil is because I didn't have a vision at the time. I didn't know what to build next because I didn't have a vision outside of what I was currently building just locally. The vision wasn't big enough. The vision wasn't bigger than the church that I was helping to lead. When you have a huge vision and there's work to do, it keeps your eyes off of the little things in front of you. It keeps your eyes on a horizon much further ahead and much higher than you're looking toward now. So see above. Next, live above. What I mean by live above is this. Don't stoop. I forget who said it. It might have been a president. It's like, don't argue with stupid people. They'll drag you down to their level and they'll beat you silly with experience. Don't stoop with people. It ain't worth it. You'll lose respect for yourself. They'll lose respect for you. And more than anything, they'll know they've won because they're not actually wanting to correct you. They're wanting to hurt you or they're wanting to tear you down. There are people that will come after you in love and share genuine concern with you because they care. They may be wrong, but they'll do it in a right way. But criticism and nasty opinions, people aren't looking to help you. They're looking to hurt you. So look at the way people are delivering it. But don't stoop down to their level. Reinforce who you are with the way you respond to it. When you carry yourself above it, not only will you see yourself above it, But those other people that are throwing dirt at you, they will see themselves as below you and like they're looking up at you. Put on a show for them to watch. Part of living above is also just ignoring them. This is what I found was one of the most satisfying along the way things to do with some of these people was just ignore them. Phone calls, letters, threats, just ignore them. What they want is your attention. What they want is you to know that they're causing some damage and they want you to be worried about what's going on. Fear is what controls us more than anything. And then finally, once you learn to ignore them, by the way, there's that not stooping part. There's never arguing with people, right? Don't stoop, don't argue, don't explain yourself. That's one of the things I absolutely respect about my parents over the years is they never got in the mud with other people. People trashed them publicly and privately, and my parents wouldn't even refute the charges, just completely ignored them. They chose to live above them. Part of that living above them, though, can be that ignoring them. And once you learn to ignore them, then you learn to love it. And that's a place that I'm beginning to find myself. All the hate online, all the stuff that flies at you, people are like, when does the hate online really start? Well, start opening your mouth enough and the hate will come. But the second the hate starts to come, so does the growth. Even I'm just talking social media for a second. Now you know you're hitting a nerve. Learn to love it. It's a good sign. When you're getting resistance from people who think too small, from people who are in opposition to God's call in your life, that is a sign you're going in the right direction. Learn to love it and learn to treat it like a destination. Learn to treat it like a beacon to go toward. Look to treat it like the North Star. In living above, this is my final point, by the way, living above. There's just bullet points under it. Don't stoop and reinforce who you are. Ignore them. Learn to love it. Next is never apologize. Now, I'm not saying don't apologize when you're wrong and when you know you should. But don't apologize for things you're not sorry for and that you didn't do wrong and where you genuinely don't believe you should. Do not cave. That's one of the things that drives me craziest about all these cuckold celebrities that apologize for everything they say because some retard on Twitter decides to call them racist. Say what you believe and stand on it. Stick with it. This whole cancel nonsense is because people apologize. Do not back down. When you know you're doing the right thing, do not back down. When you know what you intended for something to mean, you don't back down. Stick with it, don't apologize. And then finally, double down. When you double down, people realize you aren't to be messed with. You're not going to cave. You're not going to backpedal. You're not going to apologize. It's interesting. I had an artist that I managed. I managed artists that I like, music artists. We toured all over the nation. We did major radio campaigns. I signed some of them to major label deals. We did a lot of cool stuff, played amazing shows and venues and all that. In 2019, an artist that I had signed to a major label, radio play, national tours, all that fun stuff. Some of the biggest shows in the nation. They went through some of this cancel culture stuff where people were accusing them of being, this, that, and the other. And they had a bunch of shows canceled on them, tickets refunded to point of purchase, all that, right? I encouraged them to put out a statement the day after this happened. And it happened online. There was just an explosion online. They were publicly called, racist, fascist, all this other fun stuff by these blue-haired geniuses. And men who think they're women and who think men can get pregnant and call an abortion as opposed to child murder, right? Those people. Remember what we talked about? Know who's talking? And I encouraged them to put out a statement, and a strong statement, but I didn't hit the thing dead on with what I was encouraging them to say. I wasn't encouraging them to necessarily attack anything. I was just encouraging them to say something and address it. But the thing that I love most and I respect most about them is they didn't say a thing. They didn't even acknowledge it. They didn't hide from it. Kept posting right away, just right online. Keep on going. They let it run off their backs like water off a duck. And I respect them for it. They respect themselves more because of it. These idiots online realized they weren't going to flinch. They're just going to keep going forward. They're not going to stop with what they're doing. Treat it as insignificant and learn to love it. You'll grow into someone who doesn't care. I'm at a point now where I genuinely don't care. I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't care what anyone's opinion is. I care about God's perspective. I care about what He has to say. When you get to that place, that is an unbelievable place of freedom. And I encourage you to go and find it and live in it to the greatest extent possible. Let me know what you think in the comments on this video. Share this with a friend. Put it into action in your life. I'll see you guys next time.